Hello ladies, MBs and gents. This is my final video in response to Noel Plum's 2 responses to me. Apologies for the delay, I have been very busy recently. What I wish to do in this video is answer my own question, which I posed in my original video, but before I do this I'd like to point out that if your response to that question was anything akin to these responses, touchy much, just a suggestion, in future when someone asks a question that you feel applies to you, instead of viewing it in the most uncharitable light possible and proceeding to react with the over-defensiveness typical of the insecure, how about putting some of this objectivity you people constantly sing the praises of into practice and simply give a straightforward answer? Some people did just that and gave me a sensible, straightforward answer that wasn't loaded with over-defensiveness, and I'd like to say thank you. I appreciate your thoughts. Now, to answer my own question, in my opinion, YouTube atheism seems to have achieved a few things. For people living in very Christian areas of the world, it does seem to have broken a certain culture of silence. A lot of people certainly seem to be atheists, yet before YouTube their atheism is something they hadn't felt empowered to be open about. Being able to talk about things is important, even if it is just with other people who already agree with you. Just knowing that there are other people in the world who share your views can give a person much needed peace of mind. Side note, this is why I have very little time for the accusations of echo chambers that are so prevalent in this environment these days. It presumes everyone who comes onto the internet is here to argue, and that they can't have any other purpose for being here. If you've come onto YouTube or any other social media in order to find like-minded people, that is perfectly understandable, and not something you need to apologise for. Indeed, for some people, this may be the only time they get to communicate with people who agree with them and or understand them. Another thing YouTube atheism has achieved is what is commonly referred to as deconversion. I say commonly referred to because the word deconvert is a weird one. To convert something or someone means to change that something or someone. If we change something and then change it back, we don't call the latter process de-changing. We simply call it changing. It's almost as though the word convert is too religious sounding for the non-religious to be willing to apply to themselves. But I digress. There is certainly evidence that a substantial number of people were prompted to apostasy by some of the atheist content that is on YouTube. And in most cases, said apostates see their apostasy as a positive event. The thing with abandoning a certain belief or set of beliefs, however, is that inevitably one is faced with the question of, what do I believe now? If I don't see the Bible or the Quran or any other such holy text as a reliable source of information of how to live my life, what do I see as a reliable source? If I don't believe human beings were made from mud and a rib bone 6,000 years ago, what do I believe to be the origin of our species? These sorts of discussions are both inevitable and important, yet some people do seem to be very much declaring themselves to be the arbiters of which discussions are acceptable and which aren't. For example, attempts to raise the voices of women and other marginalised groups within atheism have been met with much hostility, including threats of violence. Some people have attempted to justify this by appealing rather pedantically to the strict literal definition of atheism, i.e. a lack of belief in gods. I mean, there's nothing in that definition about feminism or social justice, right? The problem is, there's also nothing in that definition about skepticism, or having an interest in science, or supporting separation of church and state. Yet the same people who object to discussions about feminism and social justice on the grounds that they aren't part of the definition of atheism don't seem to have the same problem with things like science, skepticism, and secularism being worthy topics of discussion. This is where we start to very much see the shortcomings of YouTube atheism, when it refuses to see itself as one issue that intersects and interacts with many other issues, and instead tries to pass itself off as some sort of separate issue. It inevitably becomes a place where otherwise privileged atheists come to indulge in their privileges, such as white privilege, cis privilege, etc., without having to suffer the marginalisation their atheism normally brings them. Meanwhile, atheists who are also marginalised in other ways, e.g. black atheists, transgender atheists, etc., are not as able to benefit from a community that surely should benefit them. With this in mind, the solution to me seems to be either accept that a community that insists upon super strict adherence to the most pedantic definition of atheism is not adequate for addressing religion as an issue, and that therefore a new community that defines itself by something other than atheism is needed, or stop being so excruciatingly pedantic about the name of the community and allow for the fact that there's a number of issues that are inevitably going to end up being discussed in a community that discusses atheism. It's certainly not escaped my notice that the same people who insist that feminism has nothing to do with atheism have no problem tying atheism and anti-feminism together, despite anti-feminism having nothing to do with the definition of atheism either. Anyone would think these people are using their own personal wants and needs as a benchmark for what is and is not allowed within YouTube atheism, rather than logic or reason or any of the other things these people incessantly bleat on about. So while YouTube atheism has achieved things, it's also caused harm, and the former does not negate the latter. To further drive the point home, let's look at the popular accusation that feminism is poisoning atheism. We could of course waste time appealing to the strict definition of atheism and blather on about how atheism is just a lack of belief in gods and how you can't poison a lack of belief in gods, but instead I think we should be just a bit sensible and use just a bit of initiative and assume that what the phrase means is that somehow feminists have come along and spoilt the atheist community like a big old bunch of meanies. Given as a substantial number of very popular YouTube atheists have recently openly expressed their support for the administration that advocates for the teaching of creationism in schools, the illegalization of abortion, denies climate change, is generally anti-science, foregoes skepticism in favour of alternative facts, opposes same-sex marriage, approves of discrimination by employers against LGBTQ people on religious grounds, etc., 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 it's safe to say it certainly wasn't feminism that poisoned atheism. Rather, what poisoned atheism was the alt-right. What's particularly bad about this is the alt-right didn't even do this sneakily or subtly. Rather, they walked into the metaphorical room with muddy boots on, stomped all over the carpet, helped themselves to the seat at the head of the table, and began loudly asserting their authority. And when feminists pointed this out, quick as a flash, the alt-right, from its self-appointed position at the head of the table, declared that feminism was poisoning atheism with its agenda, and that feminists aren't real atheists because feminism is a religion. People, of course, believed this, and in so doing happily submitted to the alt-right's agenda. Fast forward to a few years later, and here we are. A YouTube atheist community that is more accepting of conservative Christian creationists who believe women are biblically required to be subservient and that LGBTQ people are an abomination because the Bible says so, and that climate change is something we needn't worry about because Jesus is going to save us all, than it is of atheists who also happen to be feminists. Hell, there's even channels that rarely if ever talk about atheism being held up as though they are somehow important contributors to the atheist community. It should be a source of much embarrassment to the likes of Thunderfoot, to name but one person, that a degenerate like Cult of Dusty was actually able to figure this out before they did. This is the main reason why I don't think our interest in a person's beliefs should stop at their apostasy. I think it's important to promote the values of secular humanism to people, else leaving religion isn't so much of a step forward as it is a step sideways. Regarding Noel Plum's question, I can't answer it quite simply because what he describes as a new progressive isn't a description of me. I have no affiliation whatsoever with Atheism Plus, and as such, any of their successes and or failures cannot be credited and or blamed on me. Noel Plum also, as I mentioned in a previous video, makes the historically inaccurate claim that taking a hardline approach to progressive activism is something new and thus a defining characteristic of new progressivism. Hardline activism is not new, ergo a hardline progressive activist cannot be considered a new progressive simply by virtue of being hardline and progressive. Noel Plum has also contradicted himself, at first making the somewhat sensible decision not to classify me in the rather clumsy category that is SJW, but later making a video explicitly referring to me as one. If there were any doubt remaining about his intellectual honesty, this should surely eradicate it. It has occurred to me, however, that there might be some benefit in putting together a video in which I outline what I do believe, so as, at the very least, people who do wish to critique my views know what they actually are. That's something I'll consider. Thanks for watching.